When the head of the FBI forgets the deadliest terror attacks in modern American history, you know something is deeply wrong. This wasn't a debate about policy. It was a test of truth. A sitting member of Congress had to remind the nation's top law enforcement officer of Charleston, Pittsburgh, El Paso, Buffalo, names every American remembers not because of politics, but because of pain. These were acts of hate, acts of violence, acts that tore communities apart. And yet when asked to acknowledge them, the man responsible for tracking domestic terrorism hesitated. The hearing started quietly, but you could feel it shift in real time. Representative Sidney Kamlager Dove didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to.
Lady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for coming here today. And actually, thank you for your response to my colleague from New York who asked you earlier about violent extremism. And you said that there is violent extreme ideology on both sides. And I think you actually alluded to that same statement yesterday in the Senate. So I too have some questions I'd like to ask you. These are not gotcha questions, and just deny, please, what you deem to be false. So Dylan Roof, who followed white supremacist propaganda, murdered 9 black parishioners in Charleston in 2015. Do you deny this?
I'm sorry. Dylan Ruth?
Roof?
Roof, can you give me some more information?
You're head of the FBI, you probably know this. If you don't know, that's fine. You can,
If you can give me a reminder, I've got a lot in front of me.
It was national news. Robert Bowers murdered 11 Jewish worshipers in Pittsburgh in 2018.
I do remember that.
And it was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack. So do you admit that that happened?
I'm not saying the other thing didn't happen. I'm just asking for a little information.
Patrick Cruces, who posted a manifesto about a Hispanic invasion, walked into a Walmart in El Paso, Texas in 2019 and began firing. He murdered 23 people that day, and the youngest was 15. Do you admit or deny that that happened?
I'll take your presentation as accurate.
All right, well, I have to say all of these cases have been adjudicated. As I said, they are not gotcha questions. These incidents were national news. And as director of the FBI, you have access to all of this information. So in 2022, Peyton Grendon walked into a supermarket in a black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, and started shooting. He murdered 10 people that day. And on September 10th, your friend Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Tyler Robinson has been taken into custody and charged, but also on that day, Desmond Holley, a 16-year-old white male, shot and injured 2 students at a high school in Colorado before killing himself. And according to the Anti-Defamation League, he had a fascination with mass shootings and white supremacy. So do you admit to, deny these facts?
Those happened.
Okay. Your predecessor, former FBI Director Christopher Wray, said that one of the most dangerous concerns is that racially motivated violent extremism, especially white supremacists, has been the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism cases and is responsible for the most lethal attacks over the last decade. Do you admit or deny, A, that he said this?
I'll let the record reflect that. Whatever he said was what he said.
All right, and do you agree?
That there is racially motivated crimes being committed in America, yes.
Yes, especially white supremacists, which is the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism. I'm glad that you said this. So last week, President Trump was asked if there were extremists on both the left and the right. He was actually asked this by Fox and Friends, and his exact words were, "I'll tell you something that's going to get me in trouble, but I couldn't care less. The radicals on the right oftentimes are radical because they don't want to see crime. The radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious, and they're horrible, and they're politically savvy." Do you agree with the president?
I don't speak for the president. The president speaks for himself.
Do you agree with the president?
I don't. On what matter?
On the question that I just asked, do you agree with his statement about the radical left?
That there's ideology that's driving violence on both sides? Yes, that's what he acknowledged.
No, he didn't. He didn't. Okay. But I'm glad that you're saying that and actually creating some separation between you and the president. And I'm glad that you
That's literally
are
not what happened. He said
acknowledging
both.
that there is violent extremism on both sides. What's interesting is that the research arm of the Department of Justice, the National Institute of Justice, do you know what that is?
I'm familiar with them.
Okay, great. It is the research arm of the Department of Justice, and it published an article in 2024 devoted to domestic radicalization, violent extremism, and terrorism. I have it. It's interesting that it's no longer on the website. It has been scrubbed, but I ask these questions because what makes a strong, qualified director of any business, of any household, of the FBI, what makes a reputable prosecutor is not lapdog loyalty, but a commitment to the creed that evidence is agnostic and that the evidence will lead you to making the right decisions. And your job, no one's job is to like the data or the evidence, it is to collect it. That is how you gain trust. And Mr. Chair, I would like to enter into the record, if I may. White supremacist group stands by racist ideology with unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Dylan Roof, the radicalization of the alt-right and ritualized racial violence.
Without objection.
Thank you. Another article, how Robert Bowers went from conservative to white nationalist. I'd like to enter that into the record with me.
Without objection.
Patrick Cruces believed he was fulfilling Trump's wishes in El Paso attack, his attorneys said. I'd like to enter into the record.
Without objection.
Buffalo shooting, how far-right killers are radicalized online. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
Evergreen high school shooters' online activity reveals fascination with mass shootings, white supremacy. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
Murder and extremism in the United States in 2024, a report by the Anti-Defamation League. I'd like to enter that into the
Without
record.
objection.
And the article, the report that was scrubbed from the DOJ just recently, National Institute of Justice Journal focusing on domestic radicalization, violent extremism, and terrorism. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
And lastly, the libertarian think tank Cato and their analysis on violent extremism and the right rising in extremist acts. I'd like to enter that into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Her calm tone made every question hit harder. One by one, she walked through the bloodiest acts of domestic terrorism in recent history. Charleston, 9 black parishioners murdered during Bible study. Pittsburgh, 11 Jewish worshippers gunned down in their synagogue. El Paso, 23 people killed in a Walmart for the crime of being Hispanic. Buffalo, 10 lives taken in a supermarket because of skin color. Each story was a wound reopened, a reminder that these weren't isolated tragedies. They were linked by ideology, by hate, by a movement that calls itself patriotic but feeds on violence. And when she asked the FBI director if he remembered, he stumbled. "I'd need a reminder," he said. A reminder? About Charleston, about Pittsburgh. These weren't fringe events, they were national tragedies broadcast into every home. That moment told the country everything: denial, discomfort, or maybe something even more dangerous, disinterest. If the head of the FBI has to be reminded of these cases, what does that say about the system meant to stop the next one? But Sydney wasn't done. Her tone sharpened. She moved methodically, not for show but for record. These incidents were adjudicated, she reminded him. This isn't opinion, it's fact. And she was right. Every case went through court, every killer convicted. The evidence exists, the families still grieve. The question wasn't whether the crimes happened. It was whether the government was willing to name what they were: acts of far-right, racially motivated terrorism. She pressed again. "Do you admit that?" she asked. And as the director hesitated, you could feel the frustration of millions watching. Because this wasn't just about him, it was about years of avoidance, about leaders tiptoeing around the word white supremacy like it's too heavy to say out loud. But saying it is the only way to fight it. What made this exchange so powerful wasn't anger, it was precision. Sydney didn't rely on emotion alone. She came armed with data, history, and names. She cited former FBI Director Christopher Wray, who himself admitted that racially motivated violent extremism, especially white supremacy, accounted for the majority of lethal domestic attacks over the past decade. Even the Justice Department's own research backed that up. But as she pointed out, one of those studies, an article from the National Institute of Justice about radicalization and domestic extremism, had quietly disappeared from the department's website. Scrubbed. Gone. Why? That's the question no one seemed eager to answer. It's easy to see why her line of questioning went viral. It wasn't a gotcha moment. It was accountability, and it showed how deeply political fear has infected even the pursuit of facts. When evidence becomes inconvenient, it's easier to ignore it than to confront it. But as Sidney said, evidence is agnostic. Truth doesn't pick sides, it just exists. The problem comes when power decides which truths are worth acknowledging. Throughout the hearing, she kept coming back to the same principle. Law enforcement doesn't get to choose which crimes matter. When ideology enters the equation, justice stops being blind. The victims of these attacks weren't chosen at random. They were targeted because of race, religion, and identity. Calling it anything less than terrorism is an insult to every family that's still rebuilding after the bloodshed. Sidney's calm persistence exposed something much larger than one director's forgetfulness. It revealed a system that's become comfortable minimizing the threat of far-right violence, while magnifying other forms of extremism for political convenience. Every time someone says both sides, the reality gets blurred. The data doesn't agree with that narrative. Reports from the FBI, the Anti-Defamation League, and multiple think tanks have shown the same thing for years. The majority of deadly domestic terror incidents in the U.S. have come from white supremacist or far-right extremist motives. That's not an opinion, it's statistical fact, but facts only matter if someone's willing to say them out loud. And that's what made Sidney's questioning so striking. She didn't let silence win. She didn't let euphemisms cover up truth. She listed every attack, every ideology, every source. She entered report after report into the congressional record, each one a piece of evidence showing the same story the government already knew. She forced it to be said publicly, officially, on the record. Because denial thrives in darkness, and the only way to kill denial is exposure. Still, her questions cut deeper than statistics. At the core was something moral, leadership. What makes a strong director, she said, isn't loyalty to a person, it's loyalty to the evidence. That line alone could be written on the walls of every government building. In a time when truth has become negotiable, that statement hit like a hammer. It reminded the room that facts aren't supposed to serve politics. Politics are supposed to serve the truth. As the hearing went on, her composure never cracked. The director's responses stayed cautious, sometimes vague, sometimes almost evasive. And the contrast between the two couldn't have been clearer. On one side, facts, names, history, accountability. On the other, hesitation, qualification, careful phrasing. It wasn't just a difference in opinion, it was a difference in courage. For anyone watching, it became obvious that this wasn't just about a few cases of domestic terror. It was about whether the institutions that promise to protect us still have the integrity to confront threats without fear of political backlash. Every pause, every sidestep, felt like another reminder of how fragile truth has become in the hands of power. What Sidney exposed wasn't new, but she said it plainly. The country has been dealing with this double standard for years. The idea that radicalism is only dangerous when it comes from one direction. Yet the deadliest attacks in churches, synagogues, and stores tell a very different story. These aren't lone wolves or random acts, they're the result of online radicalization, extremist propaganda, and conspiracy movements that thrive because officials refuse to name them. That's why her questioning mattered so much. It wasn't performative outrage, it was necessary truth-telling. She reminded everyone listening that acknowledging the source of violence doesn't divide the country, it protects it. Refusing to acknowledge it does the opposite. The uncomfortable truth is that political leaders often fear the backlash more than the threat itself. Admitting that far-right extremism exists means confronting groups and donors that hold influence. It means facing the anger of people who prefer denial over responsibility. But pretending the threat doesn't exist doesn't make it go away, it makes it grow. By the end of her questioning, you could sense a shift in the room. The director agreed, hesitantly, that racially motivated crimes exist, but it took relentless questioning to get that single admission. Imagine needing to fight that hard, just to confirm what's already public knowledge. That's what made the hearing so surreal, and as she wrapped up, she didn't just stop at exposing contradictions, she documented everything. Every article, every report, every name. She entered into the record studies from the ADL, analyses from the Libertarian Keitu Institute, journals on violent extremism, and accounts of radicalization. She made sure that denial couldn't be rewritten later. The truth was preserved, line by line. In the end, her message was simple but powerful. Facts don't need permission to exist. Evidence doesn't need approval to be real. The only question is whether leaders have the courage to face it. That's what this hearing revealed, a clash between reality and reputation. One side insisted on clarity, the other clung to comfort. But comfort is how threats survive, because when those in charge refuse to name danger, danger multiplies. The same hate that inspired Charleston and Buffalo is still online right now, spreading through forums, podcasts, and encrypted chats. And every time someone powerful calls it overblown, another extremist hears permission to act. Sydney's questions weren't just about accountability inside the FBI, they were about protecting every community that could be next. Every parent sending their child to school, every person going to worship, every neighbor buying groceries. She forced America to look at itself in the mirror and ask, are we still pretending not to see what's right in front of us? This wasn't a dramatic monologue, it was a warning. If the people trusted to fight extremism hesitate to even say its name, the danger won't stay contained, it will spread. It already has. And that's why her moment went far beyond a hearing. It became a statement, a demand for honesty in a time of selective blindness, because democracy doesn't fail in one big moment. It erodes slowly, every time truth becomes optional, every time accountability feels too political. Every time those in power prioritize loyalty over evidence. That's what makes this moment so important to remember. It wasn't just about the past, it was about what happens next. Whether agencies, leaders, and citizens decide to confront hate or continue to excuse it. Sydney Kamlager Dove reminded the country that silence is complicity. That truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only weapon strong enough to defend democracy. And that fighting extremism starts not with bullets or laws, but with words, with honesty, with the courage to say this is real, and it has to stop. Because history has already written too many names. Charleston, Pittsburgh, El Paso, Buffalo. The list can't keep growing while officials look away. If we care about safety, justice, and truth, we can't afford selective memory anymore. We can't afford hesitation. So the next time you hear someone downplay the threat or dismiss the facts, remember this hearing. Remember who spoke the truth and who stumbled over it. And remember, evidence doesn't lie, but people do, when it's easier than facing the truth. If you believe accountability matters, if you think honesty from those in power shouldn't be optional, then don't look away. Share this story, keep the conversation going, and make sure more people know what happened in that room. Because democracy doesn't defend itself, it depends on us. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe truth still matters.